Good morning. I find it easier to believe in bread than to believe in a lot of other things I'm asked to believe. And I'm aware that bread is an extraordinarily complicated image for our God. I often wish that Jesus had chosen comparisons with significantly less gluten. There is leaven in this sermon. Please feel free to laugh. That's because bread can be a real problem for lots of people, especially if the idea bread calls to mind are medical issues or financial worries. Just thinking about bread can leave us hungry, angry, anxious. And what sort of bread is this bread of heaven? Is it a pillowy, soft, and buttery brioche? Is it crusty and chewy like a sourdough? Do you imagine the bread of life as a dinner roll or a baguette? Pretzel, tortilla, bagel, croissant, white, wheat, rye, multigrain, pumpernickel. I feel like all I can come up with is a pile of crumbs. Faith feels a little crummy these days, at least to me, brittle and messy. I know mine does. I just want to follow the trail of crumbs that God leaves for me. That's maybe because of the piles upon piles upon piles of crumbs you would find in my car. I spend a lot of time on the road, and I often take my meals on those four wheels, and I'm a messy driver-eater. I think a core competency for my PhD will be I-95 studies. And that's thanks to a relatively regular commute over the last 3 years between my home near New York City and the University of Virginia, where I study. When staying with friends and colleagues down south, I often recall one of my favorite lines from Dante's Divine Comedy. It shows up in the 17th canto of the Paradiso, good for a day thinking about bread of heaven, where Dante includes a saintly prediction of what has already happened in real life, his exile from his beloved Florence. From Hollander's translation, "You shall learn how salt is the taste of another man's bread." Salty bread, the taste of a far-off place that leaves you thirsty for home. Now, it's no surprise that bread is rather important for Christians. Our liturgies and daily prayers are properly carbo-loaded. The shtick seems almost too easy. Jesus tells us he is the bread of life, and the sermon was, "Loaf one another as I have loafed you." But what would it mean to take seriously that Jesus is the bread of life? For one, we know from our scripture today that this bread deity will not leave us thirsty. According to the recipe for an incarnate Son of God, approved by Orthodox chefs at the Council of Chalcedon, we have an answer to the rather perplexing question asked of Jesus in the gospel. Who is this guy to say he is the bread of life? We know that he is the son of Joseph and the son of Mary. How could someone whose parents we know be the bread of heaven? Now, friends, that recipe calls for 100% parts human and 100% parts divine. That bread of heaven is going to be a divine nature, unconfusedly, unchangeably, indivisibly, and inseparably kneaded into the human nature of Jesus Christ. God promises us to be perfectly seasoned bread. And you don't have to take my word for it. Remember that Jesus said, "I am the bread of life, and whoever comes to me will never be hungry, and whoever believes in me will never be thirsty." That last bit is where our bready God gets complicated, at least for me. I understand that eating the bread of life takes away our hunger, but it's belief in this bread of life that takes away our thirst. And I think we are a thirsty people, at least I am. Thirsty for waters to quench forest fires, thirsty for peace, rest, and calm, thirsty for justice and recognition, thirsty for reasonable conversations, thirsty for a break from aches in our bodies and aches on our conscience. In the midst of a summer heat, we thirst like exiles in the wilderness, eating bread from heaven, sure, but maybe even the bread from heaven tastes a little salty right now, salty from tears, sweat, longing. What bread do we need in our wilderness right now?